Alright, ladies and gentlemen, this is going to be our next video on environmental science, and specifically covering the nitrogen cycle. Let's get started on this next video. So what is the nitrogen cycle? Well, all the nitrogen cycle is, it's a biogeochemical cycle like we've been talking about when we've started out this energy unit. And nitrogen is going to be converted into multiple chemical forms as it circulates among the atmosphere, terrestrial, and marine ecosystems. So if we look down at the image on the left here, we can see that we're going from N2, which is nitrogen gas. We're also going from ammonia to ammonium and our nitrates here, NH3, NH4, NO2, and NO3. And there's going to be various types of bacteria that are going to be responsible for going through these conversions. Now it's important to think, why is the nitrogen cycle important? The nitrogen cycle is important because DNA and proteins require nitrogen as an element to go through and make up living organisms. So we want to be thinking about how different organisms are using nitrogen and how they're going through and gathering it. So if we go through and look at the nitrogen cycle, what's going to be important for us to understand are the three types of bacteria here. And these three types of bacteria are going to be nitrogen-fixing bacteria, nitrifying bacteria, and denitrification bacteria. Now, most of the nitrogen in the atmosphere is going to exist as N2. It's going to be a gas. And plants cannot go through and absorb this gas. They have to go through and absorb it through the roots. So what these bacteria are going to do is provide ions that allows these ammonia and ammonium ions to be absorbed through the roots and shoot systems. So the first part of this cycle is we're going to have a nitrogen-fixing bacteria convert our N2 gas into ammonia, so N2 to NH3. This process can also occur naturally via lightning. Now, this entire process is what we call nitrogen fixation, and this is what plants rely on in order to uptake nitrogen for their proteins and for their DNA. Now, the next step here is nitrifying bacteria, and nitrifying bacteria are going to do one of two things. They're going to take animal waste, that is going to be usually in the form of ammonium, and they're going to go through and take that and convert it into nitrogen dioxide, or NO2. Or they're going to go through and take the ammonia and convert it into NO2 there. That process we call nitrification. Now lastly here, we're going to see nitrifying bacteria pass this on to denitrification. The NO3 that they go through and also produces a byproduct they can go through and send to denitrification bacteria. And this NO3 is going to either through assimilation go through and naturally convert into N2 gas, or with the denitrification bacteria, they're going to go through and convert it back to N2 gas, which is going to go through and exist in the atmosphere. And that process of the denitrification bacteria going from NO3 to N2 is denitrification. So this process is going through and it's allowing these different molecules to exist so that way different organisms can use the different forms most efficiently. Alright, so let's go through and look at that first step there. Nitrogen fixation is the chemical process by which atmospheric nitrogen is assimilated into organic compounds, especially by bacteria. So what does that mean? Well, nitrogen fixation is going to take our N2 gas, our nitrogen fixing bacteria, is going to convert it into our ammonia, which is going to be NH3 there. And this is important because ammonia is water soluble and it's going to go through and allow the movement of this nitrogen to move into the plant systems. So without the movement of that nitrogen into the plant systems, they would not be able to produce the necessary proteins and the necessary DNA, and the plants would not live. So these nitrogen fixing bacteria on the nodules of many roots and plants is key in order for those plants to go through and survive. Now, if we look at nitrification in a little more detail, we can also call this ammonification. And this is the process that converts ammonia to nitrate and then to nitrate. So when we're looking at this, we're going to take our NH4 and we're going to go through and convert it into NO3 or NO2, our nitrates and our nitrites there. Now we can also go through and convert our NH3 via this nitrifying bacteria as well. I just put NH4 for this example. But what we're doing is we're breaking it down into these nitrates and these nitrites, and some plants are going to go through and use these, but other organisms can use these other types of nitrogens to go through and absorb them into their systems. And again, this process that we call here is ammonification or nitrification here. It's using that nitrifying bacteria. So the next process that we're going to go through and look at is nitrogen assimilation. And nitrogen assimilation can mean one of two things. It can be the formation of nitrogen compounds into organic components of organisms, but when we look at it in this specific cycle, we're going to refer to it as NO3 going through and naturally breaking down into N2 gas, nitrogen gas. Now, nitrogen assimilation, when we go through and talk about it here, it's not going to require bacteria to break down into that N2 gas. However, sometimes when scientists go through and refer to nitrogen assimilation, they're talking about a broader term that's referring to inorganic nitrogen that is being converted into nitrogen organic compounds in amino acids and DNA. For the sake of this course, what we're going to go through and look at here is the degradation of NO3 and assimilation into N2 gas. But again, keep in mind, scientists will use this as a broader term to talk about how nitrogen is incorporated into organic organisms. Now, this last process that we go through and talk about here is denitrification, and it's the reduction of nitrates back into nitrogen gas. And this is going to go through and complete the nitrogen cycle. So we're going from NO3, we're using the denitrification bacteria, and we are converting it back into our N2 gas there. And we can see that this is going to complete this cycle, convert back to nitrogen gas, so that way we can go through this whole process again and take some of that gas and incorporate it into plants. So this entire process, remember, it's cyclical, and denitrification bacteria are going through and completing the process. So when we're looking at the nitrogen cycle, why is it important? Well, nitrogen is a key component. It's going to make up 78% of the atmosphere, but it's a key component in DNA and RNA, and it's also a key component in amino acids. Without the presence of nitrogen, they are not going to allow for plants to grow and stay sustainable, and the entire ecosystem would go through and collapse. So we have to think about nitrogen and the use of fertilizers and the incorporation of nitrogen in the environment, because plants and really all life relies on this nitrogen to go through and provide our primary producers that are going to go through and support all life on Earth. Now, as we move from the nitrogen cycle, we also want to be thinking about this process of eutrophication, which is the excessive richness of nutrients in a lake or other body of water. Now, we want to be thinking about how humans can go through and impact ecosystems based on fertilizers and the excess of nitrogen. And we can see that this has a rippling effect on ecosystems. So we want to be going through and thinking about this as we go through and wrap up our nitrogen cycle. Again, we want to remember, just like the water cycle, this process is cyclical, and it goes through and recycles all of that matter through this process here. So again, we're remembering it's called a nitrogen cycle because it's cyclical and recycling all of that matter. All right, so this is going to be the end of the video, but we should have got a few things out of it. So did you guys learn? Well, did you learn a couple of things? Did you learn about the nitrogen cycle? Did you guys go through and learn about nitrification, assimilation, fixation, and denitrification? And then did you learn about the importance of nitrogen and how we're going to go through and relate this to eutrophication? This is going to be the end of the video. I will see you all in class tomorrow.